Assalamualaikum to Dr. Hanafiah and my fellow classmates. So today my team members and I are going to present on contemporary issue in corporate governance. Before that, I am Nurul Nadia and my team members Hazman, Fatin Akila, Dayan Shahirah and Muhammad Bazli Fakri. So, we are going to discuss 4 issues of attributes of high-performing board, whistleblowing and its implications, the rise of Islamic governance, interlocking of multiple directorships and their consequence, and evolving landscape of corporate governance in Asia. Okay, so let's look at the issues on attributes of high-performing board. Generally, there are 3 types of board, which are low-impact boards, moderate-impact boards, and high-performing boards. So, for this presentation, I will highlight on high-performing boards. So, what is high-performing boards? High-performing boards look inward, analyze what drive value, talk about different strategy, and look at how resources are being used. A more active board does not restrict the power of a CEO to define the cost of a firm. In fact, engage boards and supportive of management. The large number of directors in this group can be observed actively participating in the performance of all of the critical functions that are associated with their board practice. In comparison, to board with low or moderate influence, those with high impact have an even more strong collection of strategic priorities. When it comes to performance management, for instance, board that are more involved hold regular performance conversation with the CEO, investigate leading indications, and strive to analyze strong non-financial data. Okay, there are several attributes of high-performing board. So I will discuss on 3 of attributes of high-performing board and issue arise regarding the attribute. So the first one is the boards of director need to take action in a different manner and think with a different level of expensiveness, involvement and opportunity building. Second, the board must maintain a keen attention on potential dangers and the methods for mitigating them. And the last one, raising the level of interaction between the boards of director and the company. Okay, so let's look at the first point. So, the boards of director need to take action in a different manner and think with a with a different level of expensiveness, involvement, and opportunity building. It is not sufficient for boards to just evaluate based on what is happening now. It takes years to generate those outcomes. Not only is it important to recognize the issues at hand, but also to be aware of them. Boards of director are tasked with posing pertinent questions beyond those pertaining to regulatory compliance in order to facilitate improvement in leadership. The boards of directors need to examine the work and develop a lens through which they can view it, one to which the CEO will not have complete access in the absence of the directors. One method to approach this problem is to ask whether the company have the suitable board to choose the future CEO. Does a company have the correct CEO in place to ensure that they have the right leaders? Is it possible that the appropriate leaders of the future that will be the ones to truly define the right workforce? What percentage of that workforce consists of human, and what percentage is being replaced by machines with artificial intelligence or robots? Okay, next, the board must maintain a keen attention on potential dangers and the methods for mitigating them. Risk management is something that is usually handled by the Audit or Finance Committee, but it is also something that can be applied to strategy and performance because this risk may be the most serious obstacle a firm will face. They should be identified upfront and continuously monitored. In order to effectively manage a risk, board must distinguish between opportunity and potential dangers. The differences between different competing markets are less clear than they have ever been in today's more global and dynamic economy. For instance, considering that Amazon sells everything from food to garage door openers, could it be considered a consumer company, or is it a technological corporation because it's own and maintain the countless computer servers that make it possible for e-commerce to occur, both for itself or for others? Because of all the overlap, it is very difficult for board members to determine whether or not the conflicts being experienced by the firm are serving as growth accelerators or growth obstacles. Additionally, boards of directors should make it a priority to detect and address issues as soon as they arise. If a board director lack experience in particular market, product or operational areas, they should invite external experts to board meetings to address specific topics so that they have the appropriate expertise to adequately address any risk. So the last one is raising the level of interaction between the board of directors and the company. It is impossible to exercise sound judgment if board do not have a complete understanding of the business they are running. However, according to the results of a poll conducted with CEO, 25% of those in charge of directing a company board of director did not understand the complexity of the firm they were responsible for overseeing, which can have terrible results. One good example is Theranos, a blood testing company that was cost multiple billions of dollars but went bankrupt in 2018 amid allegation of widespread corporate fraud. Even if the company was difficult to understand, its failure were straightforward. But members lack the necessary expertise to comprehend even the most fundamental aspects of blood testing technology. Despite the company complexity, its weaknesses were easily explained. A comprehensive understanding of the company operations, market, and rival is essential for a board to play a significant role in the company's success. Also, if there are gaps in the board knowledge, new board members with those skills should be looked for. However, the problem also arises when there is an access of information. Everyone has access to information. Therefore, it is important to understand how to better make the connection of those information. In the past, getting access to information will come at a significant financial cost to firm that has dropped to a very insignificant amount. At this point in time, the most important question is what does the information suggest? The other question is what exactly does it mean and how are we supposed to make use of it? Company in their entirety are undergoing transformations. The boards are going to have to make some adjustment. What boards need to do is step up to a different form of leadership by predict what will produce value, how that will influence the business, and review whether or not the appropriate leadership is in place to make those critical operating choices on a day-to-day basis. The boards of the future will need to think in a different way in terms of expensiveness, involvement, and opportunity development. They will also need to look forward in a different way. At the end of the day, everything revolves on skill and succession, two concepts that are closely related to one another. The board of directors is the starting point for talent evaluation, which continues all the way down through the ranks of the workforce. In order to successfully predict and solve all of this problem, the boardroom will require a variety of different types of thinking. It has never been more important to have diverse perspective in the boardroom in order to effectively do that and anticipate things. And the reason for this is not because it is a non-profit effort, rather it is because it will require quickness in thinking and diversity of perspective in order to make that a reality. I think that's all from me. So next I will pass to the next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you for presentation. So I will continue the next presentation on whistleblowing and application. So according to Neil and Miss Sally of 2016, what I can summarize that whistleblowing is the term used when a person discloses information about any wrongdoing that occur in the public or the private sector, such as fraud, corruption, and abuse of power. So whistleblowing is determined as the act of telling illegal and immoral activities in the organization to the authorities or public, with intention to stop those unethical activities from occurs. Next, we go to the Corruption Perception Index (CPI). This is the most widely used by global corruption ranking in the world. It measures how corrupt each country public sector is perceived to be. According to experts and business people, Malaysia ranked is 62 out of 180 in Asia Pacific result in 2021. Here you can see Malaysia had down 3 points from 2020 to 2021. And the data that you use from the CPI is as follows. Okay, next, let me go to the type of whistleblowing. There are two types of whistleblowing, that is internal and external. The internal, meaning that the internal is whistleblowing from the employee inside the company, meanwhile external is from the outside of the company that want to report to the authority directly about the company having done wrongdoing. So basically, guys, in Government Malaysia, we have Whistleblower Protection Act 2010. This act is to combat corruption and other wrongdoing by encouraging and facilitating disclosure of improper conduct in the public and private sector. This to protect person making those disclosure from any action, and also to provide for the matter disclosed to be investigated and deal with, and to provide for other matter connected to which. So let's go for the next slide, that is factors that influencing whistleblowing intention. There are three factors, that is organizational factors, situational factors, and individual factors. In the organization factor context, there are four issues that can arise. First is proper channel for whistleblower. This is to do untrust with other employees. The report may not reach to the respective person, so this can may lead to threat to whistleblower itself. Second, a clear different procedure of reporting. No awareness in the organization about the procedure for reporting and the process due to insufficient information to the proper report and the right of the whistleblower itself. Number third, a commitment to take appropriate action, whether action has been taken towards the person have done wrongdoing or not. So late action from the management will demotivate the whistleblower and a threat to he or she. Number four, support from the top management. With no support from the top management to the wrongdoing in the company, because they're afraid the impact on the image of the organization. So usually they will settle it internally. So we'll go for the next factor, that is situational factor. They derive for three issues. First, degree to which the breach threatens to organization. The task or result of the wrongdoing will be chosen in terms to the degree of risk that will be threat towards the organization. If the threat are minimal, no further action will be taken. Number two, the amount of money involved. The issue of how much money they involve. If the sum of money are not significant, the action for the wrongdoing will not be occurred due to many aspect process need to be done, because they can see that it's more costly to resolve it rather than avoid it. Number three, a job position. The fear or job position of the person who has done wrongdoing, or the family or background. This will be the issue to whistleblowing unlikely to happen, because the whistleblower may have a threat involved to whistleblower because the identity can be transparent, or the person, the job position can give a threat to that person. So we go to individual factor context, the fourth issue, fear of retaliation. They may be reluctant to expose these employees due to fear and retaliation of lost friendship in the colleagues. So employee in this predicament to be remain silent because it is more for cultural. Second, perceive or disloyal toward the company. So whistleblowers are routinely perceived as disloyal to the organization among the top management due to focusing on moral identity. Here, the organization are more focused on earning profit without knowing they are doing wrongdoing have been done it. Number third, sign of betrayal. So arbitrators have tended to agree with employers that whistleblowing is an act of disloyalty, which disrupt business and injure their employee reputation. Fourth, potential of dismissal. Here, the whistleblower afraid there are consequences such as being fired, suspended from the duties, or will interrupt he or she career. Next, we go the implication of whistleblowing in organization. First, we go to positive side first. When implication of whistleblowing is a good governance. So the organization promote transparent structure and effective, clear communication among all of employees, and this also can protect the organization client. This demonstrates to the stakeholder and regulator that the organization are well managed. Second, risk management. It's better to hear the wrongful act at the initial stage, so the solution can be found at the earliest in preventing some further damage to organization in the long run. Number third, pick up potential problem early. It's like a fraud detection. So early action can be taken to eliminate the risk and the root problem. Because if the root problem can be eliminated early phase, so impact to the company will be minimized. Fourth, minimize cost compensation from the accident to litigation or regulatory inspection. Number five, show company commitment to a good and ethical corporate climate. This can go it's an image to the public itself. So public know they have good governance inside the company itself or the organization. Six, workplace safety for the employee and employers. Here the employees can be open. If they see through any wrongdoing, they can report it accordingly because they know their workplace are safety to give or anything about the report without doing any whistleblowing. Now we go to negative relocation. First, the potential for reputational damage to the business, any kind of wrongdoing, if it is exposed publicly, will reflect badly on the integrity, the brand, and also can be harm the organization profitability. Second, financial impact in terms of costly in court cases because the fine imposed by regulator or compensation paid out. And this can be depending on the nature of activity exposed. Here is not the cost on the financial because the cases or the fine can be much greater expensive rather than you tackle it the wrongdoing inside the organization itself. So we go for the case study. What I can find out that is the first case in Malaysia. That is Shahinuddin Sharif Bisi Wafi. So what you can see, you can read here or you can see here, Wafi have been accused of taking action that harm an informer by provoking the EMAG chairman Dato' Abdul Rahman Muhammad Sharif to sign the termination of employment document against the employee in the retaliation for the employee exposure of his improper conduct to MACC. So here, Wafi have been charged under Section 10 in bracket 3B of the Whistle Protection Act 2010, can be settled under Section 10 in the bracket 6 of the same act, which carry a fine not exceeding 100,000 or a jail term not more than 15 years or both if convicted. But here on the 2020, court have been disclosed that court ruled Wafi Abdul Aziz to be freed without calling for his defense after finding that the prosecution had failed to establish a prima facie against him. So here the court have been ruled Wafi Abdul Aziz are not wrongly conducted. So in the conclusion, good governance here include effective whistleblower policies as a critical component. People are encouraged to speak up and take bold action in a culture that is open and healthy. This will help businesses, people, and society in the large area. So in light of this, having a strong whistleblower policy is not essential to a company in the long-term success rather than really being great to have. So that's all for me about the whistleblower and application. So I invite Fatin for next presentation. So that's for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Man. So let's proceed to the third point, which is the risk of Islamic governance. So for the background and the basic concept of the corporate governance, OECD defined the corporate governance as a set of relationship between the company's management, its board, its shareholder, and other stakeholders, which provide the structures through which the objective of the company are set and the means of attaining those objectives and monitoring performance are determined. So this definition is shared by IFSP with additional to suit the context of institutional offering on the Islamic Financial Services (IFS), while the OECD definition is rather broad in terms. The IFSB definition is more specific and contains main goal of the corporate governance in Islamic perspective, which is align the action of IFS management with the interests of the stakeholder by providing proper incentive to the governance body and to comply with the Sharia principle. So the clear objective show that the major issue behind the corporate governance idea is possible conflict of interest between the owner, principal, and the management agent in the corporation. So this idea is known as the principal agent problem. So in the modern corporate literature, the principal agent problem arises when the ownership and managerial control are separate. Separation can be problematic if the management act according to their best interest instead of doing the best interest to maximize the shareholder wealth. So for instance, a manager might not be interested to spend much money in company staff training, which will potentially increase the operational cost and reduce the profit, including his salary in the short run. On the other hand, this type of investment has potentially to increase the profit for all the shareholder in the longer run. So yet the manager might not be in his position anymore in the long run. Therefore, it is obvious that the conflict of interest potentially occur between the owner and the management. So Islamic perspective on the corporate governance to extend the resemble to the stakeholder model. Indeed, it provides a more solid justification regarding who can qualify as a stakeholder and what are the rights and responsibilities that both firms and their various stakeholders may assume. This framework is firmly established in Islamic principle of property, right and contract. A stakeholder is defined as one whose property rights are at stake and a risk due to the voluntary and involuntary action of the firm. So this implies that a firm is expected to preserve property right of not only the shareholder but also those who have participated in the process of acquiring the firm property and those who could be threatened as a result of the operation. So they also posit that any group or individual with whom a firm has any explicit and implicit contractual obligation qualify as a stakeholder, although the firm may not have any formal contract with them through mutual bargaining. So Islam also believes that a person, daily activity and transaction should be based on the value of the truthfulness, firmness, fairness, respect of the law, kindness, forbearance, tolerance and uprightness, instead of deceit, haughtiness, class consciousness, ostentatiousness. This should also naturally be manifested in individual involvement in business activities and operation, as well as their relationship with all their respective stakeholders. Overall, the Islamic view of the corporate governance is more comprehensive than the stakeholder view and closely related to the ethical value in Islam. So there are two aspects in particular shape the nature of the Islamic corporate governance. One is the Islamic law. The Sharia claims that sovereign over all aspects of life, ethical and social, and they encompass criminal as well as civil jurisdiction. So the literal meaning of the Arabic word Sharia, the way, the source of life, and the technical sense it is now used to refer a legal system in keeping with the code of behavior called by the Holy Quran and the Sunnah, the authentic tradition. So every act of believer must conform with the Islamic law and observe ethical standard derived from the Islamic principle. This ethical principle define what is true, fair and just, and the nature of the corporate responsible, the priorities to the society along with some specific governance standard. So second is the addition to providing a set of business ethics. Certain Islamic economics and financial principles have a direct impact upon the corporate practices and policies. Included here are the institution of zakat, the aims tax, and the ban on the riba, usury, and the prohibition on speculation, calling for the development of an economic system based on the profit and loss sharing. So now let's proceed to another point, which is conventional versus Islamic perspective in corporate governance. So in this part, the issue is further explored. In addition to that, the comparison between the some specific issue is elaborate. So 5 important aspects as reflected by the corporate governance definition are compared here include first, the philosophical objective, second, the type of contract involved, third is the key player and their relationship. Fourth is the mechanism for the corporate governance, mean to attaining the objective. And last one, the tools mean to monitor the performance for the effective corporate governance. So firstly, there is a major difference in the philosophical objective between the conventional and also the Islamic point of view of the corporate governance. So in the conventional model, a company objective can be varied either to maximize the shareholder profit or to maximize the stakeholder wealth. However, in the Islamic perspective, the main goal is clearly stated that everyone has unity, the purpose in his or her debt to serve Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala. So one of the consequences will be, at least normatively, the Islamic society while avoiding the having conflict of interest among the members of the society. Ahmed 2003 further suggests that this will inevitably lead to the society whereby every member will cooperate with each other rather than compete, as success in life is to obtain the ultimate happiness. So such philosophy consideration do not exist in the conventional literature. So the unity of purpose in the Islamic point of view mark the existence of implicit contract, a type of contract unique of Islamic business transaction. Specifically, according to Atas 1984, the implicit contract is actual a divine contract that require a man to manifest the covenants. So through his submission is in absolute true willingness as prescribed by the divine law of Sharia. The very foundation of the Sharia is covenants between the God and man, which impose on man the duty of being faithful to his Lord. Failure to fulfill this obligation mean he or she has breached the divine contract, thus equivalent to betrayal, with the attending the consequence in his world as well as the hereafter. Secondly, both perspectives share the view that formal contracts are necessary to ensure effective corporate governance. The contracts are stipulated in form of legal law and regulation. Nevertheless, because of the Western model are based on human perspective, they tend to change over time depends on the situation. So the Sarbanes-Oxley Act 2002, for instance, was enacted just after the Enron scandal discovered its designed accounting practices to prevent financial misreporting and hold management more responsible for the accurate financial report and strengthen the power of and responsibility of the board audit committee. So in contrast, the Islamic model is based on the divine will and the Holy Quran that do not change over the time. So third is key player of different corporate governance practices is also different. As suggested in the previous section, the shareholder model believes that the major player who interests are emphasis in the shareholder or capital provider. The stakeholder model, by the contrast, place the same amount of the interest, at least in the theory, on protecting the interests of other stakeholders, while the Islamic perspective shares some similarity to the stakeholder view, such as to protect the interests of the stakeholder rather than the shareholder only. So the primary stakeholder in the case of IFI is the God and the Islam itself. So if the banks do not perform well, those who assume the Islamic system to be out of the tune with the modern world may try to blame Islam and the divine will be for the poor performance, although they do have nothing to do with that. Fourth, both perspectives recognize that mechanism for the corporate governance constitute of the board of directors (BOD), senior management and shareholder. So with the respect of first two elements, the mechanism are relatively the same of both cases. So the board have power to design the corporate governance policy framework, direct to the affair of the organization, punish and reward manager, and protect the shareholder right and the interest. So the management responsible is running the operation of the company. However, the BOD of IFI carries additional tasks according to the IFSB guidelines. The board of IIFS shall set up the governance committee comprising at least 3 members to coordinate and integrate the implementation of the governance policy framework. This governance committee may comprise of members of the audit committee, a Sharia scholar, possible from the Sharia supervisory board of IFI, and the non-executive director. So the existence of the Sharia scholar highlight effort to comply with the Islamic rules. Difference also occur with the respect to the shareholder position. According to the conventional model, the depositor is not the shareholder because their refund are insecure and guaranteed. This implies that no corporate governance mechanism is required for them. However, in Islamic perspective, the definition of shareholder will include the depositor's roles. So in the particular investment account holder that participate in PLS arrangement should act like the shareholder in the conventional practice. However, currently they neither have voice to shareholder meeting nor have guarantee for their funds to comply with the Sharia rules. Additionally, the fact that IAH are represented by the IFI management for the PLS contract lead to the situation where three-party conflict with interest between the common stakeholder, the management, and the IAH may happen. Last one, if effective corporate governance requires several tools to ensure confidence in such a system. So some important tools among the others are internal control, accounting and external audit, and transparency. So internal control, the most important tool, is basically a corporate governance framework designed to ensure the realization of organization goals and enhance its long-run profitability, as well as to ensure the management oversight and develop a healthy culture in the company. They are also necessary for recognizing and assessing risk, detecting the problem in the institution, and correcting deficiency. So the important part of the internal control include the accounting control and the internal audit system, control environment, risk assessment and management, and also the control activities. So I think that's all from me. I will pass to the next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I will be presenting on interlocking or multiple directorship and their consequences. For the definition, the term interlocking directorship refers to the circumstances in which a member of the board of directors of one corporation also serves on the board of directors of another corporation. A more inclusive and helpful definition is when firstly, a member of a corporation's board of directors, second, a senior executive of that corporation, and third, a close relative of a member of the board of directors or of a top executive of that corporation serves on the board of directors of another corporation. So in most cases, the problem of interlocking directorates is a bad condition for both businesses and the director. A board member who joins the board of a rival business will probably have access to confidential information, which encourages unfair competition. So for the regulation, for the case of the United States, interlocking directorates is a subject of antitrust. The federal agency in charge of enforcing antitrust laws is the Federal Trade Commission, that is FTC. So interlocking directorates are illegal under American antitrust laws as a result of the Clayton Act. The provisions of overarching goal is to prevent corporate coordination that will undermine the stability of the financial market in circumstances where the combination of the two businesses will create an antitrust violation. The Clayton Act specifically forbids board directors functioning as interlocking directorates from serving on more than one board within the same industry. In order to stop anti-competitive acts, the Clayton Act was passed in 1914. So next, the perspective, expertise, and influence of interlocked directorates. A seasoned director who is exposed to a wide range of industries and business models develops a more comprehensive understanding of the corporate, social, and economic landscape. They bring this viewpoint to the boardroom to assist other directors in seeing the bigger picture and recognizing macro trends that could have an impact on the company. The director is frequently asked to share their expertise with other powerful organizations, including government advisory forums, non-profit boards, think tanks, and academic institutions, once they have established a reputation in a number of different fields. These relationships and the knowledge acquired could be useful to corporate boards, provided it is not privileged. So a notable example of this case, in 2002, Google and Apple had one of the most notable instances of interlocking directorates. Google CEO at the time was Eric Schmidt, and Genentech Incorporation's former CEO at the time was Arthur Levinson. They both held directorships on the board of directors for Apple and Google. The FTC commenced an investigation under Section 8 of Clayton Act 1914. Its purpose was to determine how much competition exists between the two businesses in relation to products like netbooks, as well as Apple's iPhone and Google's Android. Before the situation progressed to litigation in 2009, Paul's executive left the board of directors of Google as a result of the investigation and the pressures that followed. The FTC probably intended to use Google and Apple as examples of how the nation is progressing with a greater emphasis on good governance than interlocking directorates, which have historically been so easily overlooked, will no longer be tolerated. So there are a number of arguments in favor of interlocked directorates. So from the literature review, firstly, Dahya et al. States that directors who are also members of other boards can offer insights or comparisons derived from personal knowledge of other organizations. Thus, decisions at one board become part of the raw material for decisions at another board. Next, Lodge and McKeever assert that interlocking of CEOs of other firms on the boards is desirable as they have hands-on experience and credibility as peers that others do not. Furthermore, serving on a board is a way to see somebody else is doing the same thing as you are doing. Next, Davis mentions that CEOs join other boards and thereby create interlocks specifically to embed what they are doing. Therefore, by monitoring each other, this practice may improve the board's performance, which indirectly will improve the firm's performance. Carpenter and Westphal argue that strategic similarities between companies can help directors who span these company boards to contribute to strategic decision-making. Academic studies have shown director interrelationships to have an impact on strategic decision-making of the board. Grant and Bader-Fuller found that interlocking directorates as one of many forms of techniques in which firms can exchange knowledge and information. And lastly, Zahra and Pierce say that interlocking directorates can greatly facilitate the performance of the board tasks of service and strategy as a form of interorganizational connectedness. So the final part of this section is the negative implications or the risk of interlocked directorates. Interlocking directorates are a phenomenon that could have negative impacts on the larger corporate ecosystem. Multiple directorship held by a single individual or group of individuals necessarily concentrates corporate power. This hinders efforts to increase diversity in the boardroom and introduce diverse viewpoints into the corporate environment. This is a very legitimate cause for concern in an environment where people name David and Steve preside over more boards in FTSE 100 companies than women or people of color. Board diversity has been shown to produce financial benefits. However, the ability to improve that makeup of the board is constrained by the number of appointments held by a single director. Next, overboarding is also a main concern. Even though director experience is highly valued, if it is distributed too thinly, the boards in question may not benefit as much from it. According to a new research from Harvard Law School, 70% of the companies in its global study had busy boards, with directors holding multiple positions. The study also discovered that companies with active boards showed lower profitability. This should be a key factor to take into account when doing succession planning because the time commitment required of board directors is continually increasing. And the final issue with interlocking directorates is transparency, where the stakeholders may not always be able to see their existence or effects. So that concludes my part on interlocking or multiple directorships and their consequences.
Assalamualaikum and good morning to Doctor and all my fellow classmates. Before I start, I want to thank my team members for their presentation just now. My name is Yang Shaira and I will present regarding the subtitle of Evolving Landscape of Corporate Governance in Asia. Corporate Governance in Asia. So this started in the year of 1997 when the ASEAN financial crisis have happened, which have marked as a commotion or burst in the ASEAN policymaker and the companies. This have used the economic crisis where it has seriously affected the investor confidence in the capital market. And the corporate governance is believed in maintaining the shareholder confidence in the capital market itself. So these critics have uncovered many institutional and policy weaknesses in this region, and it have urged the multiple reforms in the financial institution. So this corporate governance concept and practices have moved widely in the region since 1999, where numbers of rules, law, and regulations have been enacted, standards have been improved, and the enforcement have been strengthened. Okay, I will explain regarding the observation of OECD, which ASEAN Corporate Governance Roundtable. So the company law and securities law are frequently updated in all ASEAN Roundtable economics to incorporate new developments. So it demonstrates the benefit of being able to draw on the other jurisdiction experience. So this roundtable, economic are made liberal use of legislation and practice from the other country economies as source of inspiration when strengthening their own system. So this is established in 1999, where the OECD ASEAN Roundtable on the Corporate Governance serves as a regional forum for exchanging their experience and advance regarding the reform agenda on the corporate governance, while also promoting the awareness of the use of OECD principle of corporate governance. So this can bring together all the policymakers, practitioners, and the experts from the corporate governance from the ASEAN region, OECD countries, and the relevant international organizations. So on this right side, we can see there is important observation of the OECD ASEAN Corporate Governance Roundtable up until the amendment on 2014. So I will talk about some of it only. First is regarding the amendment of the Company Act in Malaysia in 2007 and 2010, which to introduce, enhance, and clarify the regulation of related party transactions and strengthen the shareholder right and also give a better defined role of the board. And the next is in the Thailand, which there is amendment on the Securities and Exchange Act in 2007, which provide more stronger protection for the investor interest to enhance the corporate governance of the listed companies. Next is in the Hong Kong, China, where there is a reform of the company ordinance passed by Legislative Council in 2012, where this new ordinance has introduced enhanced accountability of the director, more shareholder engagement in decision-making process, and improve the disclosure. So we can see other amendments also, where in Singapore, in India, they're also in the Bangladesh, Indonesia, and in the Chinese Taipei, where you can read it by yourself in here. So revise in the G20. Next is regarding the G20 or OECD Principle of Corporate Governance, which being revised in 2015, which this have provide the international set of competency assessment benchmark for both emerging and industrial economies. So this principle suggests that enhanced transparency and accountability brought about a good corporate governance standard would support a sustainable and inclusive growth of the society. So the OECD principles of corporate governance are highly praised and practiced in the ASEAN region. Practically, these OECD principles and corporate governance and output in ASEAN Roundtable are being used in all ASEAN economies as a reference in the development of their corporate governance code, regulations, scorecards, listing rules, and even in the economic work. So in the countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Singapore, Vietnam, and Thailand, the ASEAN Corporate Governance Scorecard has incorporated the OECD principle in the corporate governance as a major benchmark to evaluate the listing companies. So notably, the promise by the ASEAN authorities have improved their corporate governance situation across the region is even better. So since its inception, the ASEAN region have made a number of achievements with the OECD. So this is the three key accomplishments, which are the commencement of the corporate governance structure, the extensive enactment of the global standard under OECD principle of corporate governance, and lastly, the higher level of responsiveness and practice of the OECD. New OECD Corporate Governance Report and G20 or OECD Principles of Corporate Governance. So these OECD principles, since their first issuance by the OECD by 1999 and subsequently revised by in 2005 and 2015, are now recognized as the leading global standard to guide the policymakers and regulators in devising the effective institutional, legal, and regulatory framework for the corporate governance in the listed companies. So these have endorsed not only by 58 members of OECD, but it also by the G20 and the Financial Stability Board, where there are more than 15 jurisdictions worldwide is now adhered by this OECD recommendation. However, as a new OECD report by the Future of Corporate Governance in Capital Market, following the COVID-19 crisis, have made clear that both the COVID-19 pandemic and the longer-term trends suggest that the government corporate governance framework will need to make a further adaptation to ensure that the capital market may serve their intended purpose in allocating the substantial financial resource to support the long-term investment, underpin the economic growth of the innovation. Report highlights four priorities for the policymaker. First is to adapt the corporate governance framework to address the weaknesses revealed by the pandemic. So the experience from the pandemic called for the improvement in the framework for risk and the crisis management, as well as the related issues such as the audit quality, stock price manipulation, and the insider trading. Next is regarding improve the management of environmental, social, and governance (ESG) risk, which the investor attention to the ESG risk and its disclosure being accelerated in the COVID-19 pandemic. So the policymaker and the regulators need to ensure that the investor have the access in consistent, comparable, and reliable material information when managing their savings and assets. And the third one is to facilitate the access to equity for sound business. First is by to shift the retail direct investment to the large institutional investor has created a bias for the large listed company as the average share of the institutional ownership in the large listed company is significantly higher than the ownership in the smaller company. Second, the structure of the investment banking activities is an important factor in the high listing cost where the high underwriting fees and the stock price discount have discouraged the company from going public. And lastly, to ensure the insolvency framework support the recovery and resilience. So the crisis response policies have been holding back bankruptcy, which otherwise have happened, and this will re-emerge as a business support is would down. So keeping in mind the accumulation of the low quality debt in the economy, fit for purpose insolvency regimes and the coherent across jurisdiction will be essential for the policymakers. Here, our group has provided good policies and practices of corporate governance that being done by the ASEAN countries. So the first perspective is the authority set the requirement or the guidance stating that the listed company should have internal control and risk management system to effectively oversee and monitor various risks arising from the subsidiary and, if necessary, other companies within the group. So most of the countries have done this. So for the example, in Thailand, a listed holding company required by regulation to have a website system to oversee and monitor the cost of business for the subsidiary and implemented companies. This also been done by the Japan and the Chinese Taipei, where the regulation have explicitly required the listed company to oversee the risk of the subsidiaries. It also the same in the Hong Kong, India, and the Malaysia, where the corporate governance code or guideline implicitly lay the responsibility of the oversight of the risk management of the subsidiary at the listed companies. Next is the good practice 2, where the authority set out the requirement or guidance stating that the listed company should have a sound group governance policy or framework that ensure the clear responsibilities and accountabilities are in place. So, for example, in Malaysia, there is a guidelines to conduct the director of listed corporation and the subsidiary, which listed the requirement in the relation of the duties and responsibilities of the board in the company group, including the need of to establish the group right framework to enable the oversight group performance and implementation of the corporate governance policy all across the group. So, and the next example is in Japan, 2019, where the published group guideline provides a practical recommendation for what sector could be considered in managing the company group, presenting the case studies of both Japanese and the foreign firms. If you look at these articles, there are a lot more examples in other countries, which is good for knowledge. And I will, and for the next good practice, which is good practice 3, where the authority should ensure that the regulatory framework is in place to enable the listed company to access the key information about the activities of the subsidiary and, if any, other group companies to manage the group-wide risk and implement the group-wide objectives while classifying whether on in what circumstances it can access the material non-public information. So this has been done in almost all the companies where there is an exception for the China, where they have reported that the regulatory framework contains provisions that permit the board of management or the parent company to examine the book and the record of their subsidiary, which have without the corollary to parent company general obligation to prepare the consolidated financial statement. So the other country mostly have used this good practice tree in their corporate governance policies. Next is a good practice 4, where the authorities set out the criteria and qualifications for independent directors to ensure that they are free from the undue influence and discharge their responsibility to act in the interest of all shareholders while ensuring the protection of minority shareholding interests. So, many jurisdiction regulating framework have established this requirement related to the independent director. where it says that independent directors are expected to exercise the judgment independently. So even in the case there is a controlling shareholder, the board still have a fiduciary duty to the company and all the shareholder and some mechanism to protect the minority shareholder interest. So this also have exception, which in China they do not do this, where the controlling shareholder do not have any fiduciary duty to other shareholder. And the independent director are often expected to play important role in protecting the minority shareholding interest against the controlling shareholder. Next is the Group 25, where the authority setting out the requirement that the limit certain structure of the company group includes the quote shareholding, layering, and parent subsidiary listing, and having a safeguard to protect the minority shareholder interest against risk arising for a certain group structure. So most of the company group in Asia involve this paramedical structure with layering of companies under the ultimate parent or holding company. So within the ASEAN, only India has limited the layering. So in 2017, the India government has introduced the limit on the layering with the aim to prevent the misuse of the complicated group structure, including the diversion of funds and money laundering. In the principle, no company allowed to have more than 2 layers of subsidiaries in India. Meanwhile, in Vietnam, any subsidiary companies under the same parent must not contribute any capital or purchase share in the other company to establish cross-ownership. And in Indonesia, have adopted the strict approach to prohibit a company, whether listed or not, to engage with the cross-shareholding. Next is the good practice 6, where the authority set a disclosure provision related to the ownership and the company group structure that include the majority shareholder, beneficial ownership, corporate group structure, cross-shareholding, and the shareholding of the director. So the example is in Thailand, a listed company required to disclose 10 largest shareholders. Meanwhile, in India, a listed company required to disclose the shareholding in all the promoters, which refer to controlling shareholders and the founder and the non-promoter holding with more than 1% of share. Meanwhile, in the Japan, India, and Chinese Taipei have a disclosure requirement similar to Hong Kong, but the Japan disclosure includes the associate, and the India and the Chinese Taipei disclosure includes the associate and joint venture. So in Malaysia, a listed company is required to disclose each director shareholding for the listed company and its related corporation. And lastly, the good practice 7, where authority should clearly define the role of that controlling person, including the founder, family, and their family members should play the corporate governance and ensure that there is appropriate disclosure framework are in place to give visibility on their work. So according to this, there is 7 jurisdictions, which is in China, Hong Kong, China, India, Indonesia, Singapore, Chinese Taipei, and Thailand, that reported have the definition of controlling person or promoter contain a founder or a person who has significant de facto control over the direction of listed company, even with a smaller or no shareholding. And this jurisdiction have disclosure provision about the controlling person or the promoter. So meanwhile, in India, its regulatory parameter extend to a founder or controlling person, and disclosure of the listed company provide a clearer picture of the ownership pattern, directorship, and related quasi transactions in which they are engaged. So in India, all listed companies are required to disclose the shareholding pattern of each the promoter, where the promoter means the founder or the controlling shareholder without any threshold. So for further understanding, it is better to look at this article original of OECD 2020, Good Qualities and Practices of Corporate Governance and Company Group in ASEAN, which provides more explanation regarding the policies and practices in the ASEAN country. Development or history of corporate governance in Malaysia. So in 1965, there is true and fair certification by the director on the financial statement have happened. So in 1993, the audit committee requirement for all the PLC by KLSE listing requirement is needed. In 1997, there is establishment of the new financial reporting framework. In 1998, the directors and the CEO in Malaysia need to disclose the interest on the listed companies. In 1999, there is the establishment of the Finance Committee that limits the number of directorships held by the director of the PLC. which is a public listed company. In 2000, there is issuance of the Code of Corporate Governance, which the creation of the Malaysian Code of Corporate Governance (MCCG) 2000 that provide the compliance and disclosure on the voluntary, the principle of conduct, and the best governance practices. In 2001, it is mandatory disclosure of corporate governance code compliance. The compliance with it needs to be compliant with the statement of the internal control. There also have the establishment of the minority shareholder watchdog group to improve effectiveness of the corporate governance. Then there is the mandatory accreditation of program for the directors. So in 2002, there is implementation of MSD 226 on the interim of financial reporting. There is an internal audit guidelines for the listed company, and there is the establishment of task force of the corporate disclosure best practices. And the KLSE and PwC section joined the survey regarding the corporate governance. In 2003, there is independent review on the Malaysian Institution Accountant on all accounting firms. In 2007, there is amendment on the Code of Corporate Governance and reporting on the corporate social responsibility practices. So, in the website, this is the amendment done or the evaluation of the MCCG in Malaysia. So, during 2000s, the MCCG 2000, it covers the principle of the board practices of the corporate governance, best practices, role of the institutional shareholder, and the corporate governance explanatory notes. In MCCG 2007, there is a revise on the appointment of director to the board, assessment of the director meeting procedure, and the audit committee composition and its function. MCTG 2012 set out the 8 board principle along with the recommendation for the single principle to enhance the board effectiveness. In MCTG 2017, it has improved the earlier code in 2012, which highlight a new approach to promote the better internationalization of corporate governance culture, where it emphasized the board leadership and its effectiveness, integrity of reporting, and the effectiveness of communication with the stakeholder. In the MCCG 2021, there is update include the board policies and practices on the selection and nomination processes and criteria for the director. There is further guide on the practice with the low level of adoption and the role of board and the senior management is addressed sustainability risks and opportunities of the company. It also highlights MCCG 2021 also highlight the periodic refresh of board composition, encourage board diversity with at least 30% women director, and urgent need of ESG risks and opportunities. Conclusion. In the last decade, there is increase in regulatory pressure and the greater compliance burden, as well as the need to organizations to become more transparent about the operation. The transparency, in turn, require more rigorous corporate governance processes, as well as the information needs to be kept up to date all the time and stored in a way that is easy to access by those who need to report to regulators. So this can keep the corporate governance practices that provide the best interest to everyone and deliver a long-term corporate governance success and also economic growth. This is the references. That is all from our group. Thank you so much for your attention.